Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for being part of our series of the Red Dot Café. We hope this program adds value and inspiration to your daily life. I'm Jacqueline Carmona, your TEDx San Antonio Red Dot Café executive producer, and I'll be your host for today's event. We want to hear what you think about our conversation, so please leave comments in the comment section. We're happy to be joined today by our 2018 TEDx San Antonio speaker and co-founder and CEO of InSync LLC, Alberto Garcia-Jurado. Alberto has collaborated for over 2 decades as an advisor, consultant, and coach on aspects of cultural and collaborative intelligence with dozens of companies of all sizes. And in industries. He is a sought-after speaker that brings disruptive thoughts and insights to the field of human systems. And next, we have Dr. Rachel Tilton, who is our CEO of the award-winning firm Synergy Marketing Strategy Research. She is also Chief Transformation Officer of the Flourish Leadership and Flourish Conference for Women in Leadership. Dr. Rachel has won many awards and featured as an expert on many speaking events. Dr. Dalton earned her doctorate in management from Case Western Reserve University, Weatherhead of School of Management, and MBA with a concentration in finance, and Cleveland State University, a BA in psychology. She is also certified in diversity and inclusion by Cornell University and is qualified administrator for the Intercultural Development Inventory. Let's start off with Alberto, our TEDx San Antonio speaker, who talked about generational gaps and the future of individuals and organization. Alberto, tell us a little bit more on how you and Dr. Rachel differ on individual versus organizational aspects and how to approach diversity, equity, inclusion. But first, what is diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I was wondering if maybe Rachel could answer that one, because she's amazing. She's so great. Would that be okay?
Sure. Dr. Rachel?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having the both of us. We really, really appreciate it. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is this notion of the range of human differences that includes but is not limited to race, ethnicity, gender identity, religion, national origin, etc. So diversity is that range of human differences. Inclusion, however, is the achievement of a social or personal or work environment in which all individuals feel that they are treated fairly and with respect, and that their individual values are, that their individuality is valued. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. And then finally, belonging is that feeling of security and support, where there is a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity. And so these elements are very different. I'm really glad that you asked me to sort of define those things, Alberto. So diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome. So hopefully that helps. Equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome.
I think that was an amazing definition. I love the last part. That's so great.
Thank you.
So, through all our conversations, I came to realize that Rachel and I, we come at these elements from different perspectives. They are nonetheless very, very much, compatible, as well, right? That they fit within each other and they provide a more holistic solution. And Rachel will tell me if I'm getting this right, but I do believe that what she does and a lot of the approaches that are out there are dealing with what the individual has to bring from within themselves. That awareness, the understanding, the sensitivity of diversity, and the effort, the choice to be more inclusive and to be more open to that diversity. And so she does all that amazing work on creating that inner elements that are needed to achieve those goals. And as for myself, I also try to achieve that, but from without. What does the organization have to provide in structural terms, in organizational terms, in order to help the individual who has made those choices, like Rachel said, who is looking for that? How can we help them through structural means, organizational means? So that's the two parts of the puzzle that I think have to work holistically and then seamlessly together. Unfortunately, sometimes we do one or we do the other, or we do pieces of one or pieces of the other. But seldomly do I see organizations taking an integrated look at the human system and saying, okay, we have to work the relational, the operational, and the structural all together to achieve these needs. Would that sound just about right?
That sounds perfect, Alberto. In all of our discussions, I've been so pleased with the way that we approach things differently from an organizational perspective, and really sort of, to your point, get that holistic notion. So individuals, as we've talked about, organizations are made up of people, right? And so we want to make sure that each individual has the tools and resources they need to be successful and that they need in order to create an inclusive culture. But you're absolutely right. With all of the tools and resources that are required, without that structure, then you won't have an inclusive culture, and you run into all of the problems that you and I have talked about with the lack of productivity, with attrition, et cetera. And so really taking that holistic approach, approaching it from the top down, as well as from the bottom up, that's how we're going to reach real inclusion, at least in the corporate space.
Absolutely. And I always like to use the example of the symphonic orchestras that we discussed. It's one of the great success stories in the States about inclusion, about how, back in the 70s, they had only 5% women in symphonic women musicians. And when they realized that, they started working on the relational, on that inner part, on creating awareness. But they realized that it wasn't enough. People wanted to do it, but a lot of the bias that they had, like we all do, right, as you well know, it's subconscious. Sometimes you don't even know you're doing it, okay? And you don't realize you're exercising a bias. And the big solution they came up with to help them was put the musicians behind a curtain, so they can actually not see them. And in that sense, that's what I mean by saying that both elements have to work together. We have to do that awareness and create the desire in people to do that. But then we have to give them some curtains, organizational curtains, to help them not exercise those subconscious bias. And I think that's really, when you put it all together, then we can move so much faster to those goals.
Yes, and you brought up conscious bias and unconscious bias, which is, really sort of taking a look at implicit bias, which is really these social stereotypes about groups of people, and we all have them. You are definitely speaking a word when you say each and every one of us has unconscious biases. I know I like chocolate ice cream, right? And I'm always going to be looking to have chocolate ice cream. But there are also biases that leaders and managers can have that, when exercised, their power and privilege can really provide some, as both of us know, some real problems in their organizations. And so we try to give people, barriers, first of all, understand that you have unconscious biases, understand what those biases are, and then really work in order to mitigate those biases when you see them popping up, bearing their ugly faces in your lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now,
So
go ahead.
No, No, I was just wondering. I thought that Jacqueline was going to ask us another question, but as she well knows, you and I can talk for an hour
Oh yeah,
with any
oh yeah,
questions for
absolutely.
sure. um, I was thinking about one of the sort of questions that you and I have talked about that I think is important and really relevant to the time that we're living in now, and that is, thinking about the relationships between African American, or as I like to be called, Black people, and our Latin American brothers and sisters. And you and I have talked about this, and I think it's important and very relevant to the times in which we live.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because also talking about minorities, we're talking about the two largest minorities within the country, and the ones that are growing the fastest. So there's a whole dynamic there, and yet when you look at both of them, the trajectory, the path, the history of coming to the United States and being part of the country are so different. And of course, most Latin Americans decided to come here, chose to come here, except for the Hispanics down here in Texas, where I live, down in the Valley and in Texas. Here, the U.S. kind of caught up with us. That's
Right.
But we were already here. That's what I mean. I mean, not me personally, but the Hispanics here. And whereas as most of African Americans were actually brought here, not necessarily decided to come here. There are many exceptions, of course, but I think that's the beginning. That big difference is huge. But also the end result was that whereas African Americans or Blacks hadn't had more chance to acculturalize and in many ways become more of a part of the history and the fabric, the Hispanics are still a work in process. We still have huge migration coming in. Plus, it's so different. I mean, we tend to bunch Latin Americans and saying Latin Americans, but if you see somebody from Argentina and somebody from Mexico, to begin with, the Argentinian is going to be almost the European. Mm-hmm. Down in Argentina, there were very few pre-Columbian peoples. So the culture that evolved there is basically European. And you see the Argentinians, they're physically more like Italians or Spanish or German. And the culture is so different. Whereas Mexicans, I mean, Hispanics were not that much averse about mixing. The fact is 98% of all Mexicans are mixed, And
Black people, we're all mixed.
yeah, well, we're all mixed, yeah, but what we call mestizos in Mexico is everybody's half something, half European, but also half Toltec or Aztec or whatever, whatever the region. So it's a very different kind of culture. So also bunching everything south of the border on the one, it's a big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
the cultures are different, the perspectives are different, the reactions are very different. The
language and the food, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a question that is coming in from outside. What are the specifics of how you implement the structures that you're talking about? What does that look like from an actionable perspective? So I'll start with my perspective, and then you can share yours if you don't mind, Alberto. That's a great question.
Yeah.
When Synergy does work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we really take a holistic approach, which is sort of what this whole conversation is about. And we have a model called LEAP, right? And so we go in and look at the organization. We always start with data first, right? We're researchers. We're researchers by trade and by DNA. So we always start with data. We generally start with the intercultural development inventory, or IDI. And then we take a look at the leadership. So as I mentioned, LEAP, right? We look at the leadership and the strategies. What are the strategies around diversity, equity, and inclusion? How is diversity showing up in your board, in your management team? And then we look at engagement, the culture of the organization. How are you sourcing, onboarding, and how are you treating the individuals there? Then we look at advancement. Right? What are the opportunities for advancement for each of the individuals to take advantage of? is there career pathing, right? So really taking a look at whether or not opportunities are allowed to or shared with everyone across the organization. And then finally, we look at positioning. So that includes your brand. Is your brand showing up as an inclusive brand? Are you engaging with the community in an inclusive, from an inclusive perspective in terms of the language that you use, in terms of the way in which you engage your customers and stakeholders? And so we really try to take a holistic approach, teaching and training along the way, and making sure that we know that people have varying levels of their ability to deal with differences. And so we try to teach people, as opposed to judging them, ways in which they can, number one, mitigate the biases that they do have. And number two, when they find that they have those biases, we give them the tools and resources so that they know what to do about them. So again, we use LEAP and really take a look at the whole organization and how it's structured so that it can become an inclusive organization, which can add up to 36% of profitability to the organization.
Yeah, and on our part, and complementing that again, because our focus is to creating highly effective and efficient and objective and equitable human systems, we take a look at all the strategies and everything that they're doing to achieve those ends, and then we look at certain structural elements, and we got 8 of them really pinpointed down that have to fit in that have to support that, and have to create those curtains so people can have some support in not exercising the biases and becoming more objective and more focused on equity. So, for example, and these are things that people don't relate to that, like job descriptions. It's amazing, but even when you take a look at job descriptions, they tend to be kind of vague in respect of what the outcomes of the job should be, how the job is going to be measured or evaluated, and it becomes very wide open. So that's one example. Another example, of course, is the performance evaluation. How is that done? Because, of course, in that, the more you have open-ended elements for a performance evaluation, what do you think of this person? What do you think about their performance? What do you think of that? The more room you're giving people to subconsciously exercise those biases. So that's the kind of thing we look at. Or, for example, the leadership model. You were talking about leadership. We also look at the structural elements. So how's leadership being structured and exercised as a function, as a role? I think that nowadays being a leader is one of the most ungrateful professions in the world, because we've piled stuff on leadership like crazy. The other day I was doing an exercise. I looked at 3 different articles on how to be an inclusive and an effective leader. And I was just looking at the qualities that they write that the leader should have. I ended up with over 30 different qualities that I don't think any one human being is going to have. So we have to pare it down to a model of operation of being a leader, and the tools that can help leaders be effective and have the tools to not exercise their biases, but being more subjective in how they deal with the team. And of course, being more focused on helping everybody according to their needs to achieve the same goals. Mm-hmm. So we do that structural part. And
so our next question is, what are the unique experiences Latinx and African American people have in the workplace? And how can organizations improve these experiences? It's interesting. We're working on a project for a national bank that has many thousands, probably almost 30,000 employees, and doing listening sessions for them in order to gain that information and that knowledge. We just did the same thing for an organization here in Ohio. And I will share with you after 20 years of research that Black, Latinx, and sometimes Asian, certainly Muslim, sometimes LGBTQ, and you and I spoke about varying abilities, right? Mental and physical abilities as well.
Yes.
That marginalized people do have a very different experience in the corporate space. So we talked about advancement and career pathing and succession planning. All of those pieces of their work experience are very different than for their white counterparts. Quite frankly, men and women have very different experiences in the workplace. And so what we're trying to do, at least what Synergy is trying to do, is again, give the organization, as Alberto beautifully said, give the organization the tools and resources that it needs to understand what those gaps are and how to begin to fill them. Now, change is hard, and people don't like change. And another thing we know about change is that true sustainable change in organization takes 11 to 13 months, and it's not going to happen a moment sooner. And so leaders, to your point, Alberto, really need to be signed up in order to grow that inclusion muscle, need to be signed up for the long haul in order to make change throughout the organization. But you're absolutely right. There are times that being a leader is a tough job.
Oh yeah, and to the question also of the African Americans and Latinx, I would say that there's an experience there, but I think that equity, inclusion, is so much, like you just said, Rachel. It's a much wider thing. And I was speaking with a good friend of mine the other day, and we mentioned this, who works with Industries for the Blind, and he was saying, he was kind of saying, I wish that all the conversations that we have about inclusion and diversity also included blind people, because we seldomly hear anything about that. So I think that to the point. Yes, we have those big issues, the African Americans, the Latins, gender, race. I think those are the big issues. But if we just keep the conversation there, we're going to forget that diversity is about everything. I think you were mentioning 60-something dimensions of diversity.
36.
36. There are 36.
Yes, 36 dimensions of diversity.
Yeah. So I think that the key here would be not so much to focus on the differences, but to focus on how we're going to make sure that those differences don't have a negative impact on people's lives and organizations.
Absolutely.
And just to the point about leadership, we have something that we call the objectives matrices, which is a matrix where people actually focus on outcomes, and you can actually evaluate people based on outcomes, not activities, and not perception of activity. Mm-hmm. And we have things like we just finished an implementation in an energy company. And one of the leaders there, and I think I mentioned this example in the past, was he had two co-workers, and one of them, he had a preference for one of the two co-workers because she was very dynamic and very outgoing and everything, and the other person was quieter. But when they actually started using the matrices, which I call one of the curtains, he started realizing that this person was very dynamic and people-oriented. She was achieving like 40% of her objectives per week, whereas the other person was quieter and everything was going for 95% per week. So that was a big surprise, but that's what when you create this kind of elements to create more objectivity for the leader and help the leader in that sense, that helps to overcome those perceptual biases that we have. And of course, it doesn't mean that one person is better than the other. It just means that what the leader discovered was that he had to give more coaching of one kind to one person, how to become more outgoing, more people-oriented, and more coaching to the other person on how to be more effective and efficient.
That makes me think about, we talked about diversity prediction theorem the other day, which is, just this notion that a diverse group of people can come up with a better solution than sometimes than the quote unquote experts in a particular field. And that's one of the things, the beauties of the, I call diversity, equity, and inclusion, Jacqueline knows this, my God job. I think I shared this with you too, Alberto, that this work is my God job. I get excited every day thinking about how to eradicate systemic isms across the board. To your point, mental ability, physical ability, sexual orientation, race, gender, all of the isms that, as soon as we can eradicate them, or at least the harms that happen because of them, the better we will be, just a much healthier world. But one of the things that I was thinking about with regard to diversity prediction theorem is that when you allow people to show up as their whole selves and be authentic, as we were talking about yesterday, Jacqueline, you get all of the creativity, you get all of the innovation. The company is able to capture all of that value from that individual and grow. Again, back to that profitability matrix we talked about before. Inclusion is not just the right thing to do. It obviously is the right thing to do, but there's so much value to be captured when you allow people the opportunities and allow them to show up as their whole selves.
Absolutely.
And Alberto, in terms of the Latinx and the African Americans in San Antonio, what would you say, how's the relations in San Antonio, Texas?
Well, San Antonio is a very special kind of town, not because I live here, not because I love San Antonio so much. It's a very special kind of town. It's a town where minorities are actually the majority now, especially Hispanics. And I can tell you that there's a diversity here and a movement to have a lot of inclusion where everybody's on board. I'm not saying that there are no conflicts or frictions, but I can tell you that because there's a lot of native Hispanics who have been here for 200, 300 years, Hispanic families who were here before it became Texas and before it joined the U.S. And also there's a long history of people working together and collaborating together here. I think it's a place that is showing up in the map as a very, very, very inclusive city. So we do have some issues, especially with the recent immigrants, with the new immigrants who are coming from south of the border, from Mexico and Central America. They are having a hard time integrating. And I think that here in this particular region of the world, this particular part of the country, that is the biggest issue. All the immigrants we're having from Latin America coming in, and of course we're so close to the border, so we have a lot of that. And they come and they settle in South San Antonio, and they create their own small communities, and they don't mix. And there's a push, there's a struggle to get them integrated. And I think that here in San Antonio, that is one of the biggest issues right now. That, and also, and this is something that we talked about, and both the Black community and the Hispanic community have, is that, I don't want to generalize ever, okay, but as there's a trend not to value education that much. I was having a conversation this morning with somebody from South San Antonio who was doing some gardening, and this person was talking about their kids, and what this person was saying is, I'm just waiting for them to be old enough to join the family business and help me with the gardens and doing all that. He wasn't thinking about sending his kids off to college. He was thinking about when are they going to be old enough to join the family business and start making money. And that's one of the other biggest issues that we have, I think, is that not going to college, not getting an education is also a huge element in continuing biases and continuing to live in very close communities. Education is one of the largest equalizers and one of the things that open up your mind, I think.
Well, I have to say, I come from a very different experience for sure. As I've shared with you, My mom is one of 19 children. She has, 17. She's one of now 17 living children. And my grandparents were sharecroppers. My grandmother finished the 8th grade. My grandfather finished the 3rd grade. And they had all of these children living in a 1-bedroom home in Gould, Arkansas, which is only on the map now because we have Google. And they really stressed education, faith, and community. Those 3 things have been drilled into their children's minds. And now 11 of my aunts and uncles, including my mom, are attorneys. And they came from that, from absolutely nothing. So it's interesting, and I know, to your point, Alberto, there are many families where education is diminished or is not looked at as the great equalizer. But I can tell you, I would not be here and would not have had the opportunities that I've had were it not for being educated. And my mom and dad really stressed that you can do whatever you want, but you at least have to have an education so that you can thrive in this world and be successful. So I do think that, as we're talking about our Black and Brown and other, other people as well, that at least having some kind of education. I'm not going to say that everyone has to get a PhD or a master's or all this paper I have. Believe me, you don't need all of that. But find what your passion is in life and learn about that so that you can really, provide value to the customers and or employees and or colleagues that you have, that you can really do the work in a meaningful way, no matter what that work is.
No, absolutely. And I just want to clarify, don't get me wrong, there are many success stories here from the Hispanic community, many.
And you're
stories,
one of them.
Like I'm a first generation immigrant coming from somewhere else, But so my family was also kind of special down in Mexico and very much focused on education also. Fortunately, I was fortunate in that sense, as were you. But I can tell you that although there are many success stories, they are more exceptions than the norm, unfortunately. Yes. Unfortunately. Yes. And there are some very bright, beautiful exceptions, yes. But the norm, let's say, the trend in the social trend in those cultural groups tends to be to value more, get to work and help the family than get you there to get educated. And then as you move up, then you can come back and help the family.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
So our next question comes from Angelica. These topics are seen by a lot of people as jargon and often dismissed. Rather than providing different definitions or providing examples, what are other ways to present these subjects that help clarify their definition and validate their existence for those who dismiss them as jargon or trending words?
Oh.
That's a really good question. Please, Alberto, I have an answer. I would.
Let me give a stab at this. Take a stab at this. Indeed, a lot of the terms can sound like very technical or jargon terms. I think that the way to better understand this, I would say, let me put it in the military terms, okay? Because I worked under a 3-star general in the U.S. Mexico Cultural Educational Foundation, and the goal is to be more like in the military, which I think is a great example. And the reason why the military was able to move forward so fast in integrating is because they like to say bullets don't see colors. The enemy doesn't care if you're Black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever. They're going to shoot at you. And so everybody has to pull together. And because everybody pulls together, they're able to achieve great things. So I think this more than a slang word is really talking about the future of this country. I would like to go back to the old motto of the Republic, which I don't know why it got lost. It shouldn't have, which was "E pluribus unum," and in Latin that means "out of many, one."
Out of many, one.
So I think that this is that conversation. We have to stop the balkanization, the division, and realizing that. And I love what Rachel said the other day. Deep down, we're just all people. We're people. That's it, and we all want basically the same things. So it's not about buzzwords, and it's not about slang terms. It's about moving beyond the things that separates us to realize we have got to pull together for common goals, for things that are going to benefit everybody. But we're not going to achieve those things that we need to achieve to benefit everybody if we don't all pull together. And I would say that forget about the jargon. It's just about achieving what we need to achieve so we can all live better and our families can live better and we can have a better country and a better future. But if we continue harping on the differences or living with those biases, it's not going to happen. So it's about pulling together. It's about the pluribus unum, really.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Alberto. I really think was beautifully said, and the sentiments behind it are what is really important. We cannot continue to be a country that is ripped apart at the seams by these divisions. But people do have to have the tools and resources in order to understand how to get past those differences. One of the elements of the question said, how can we make this easier to understand? And I love the story that you told about the military. I mean, our enemies don't care if we're black or white. They want to harm us. There's another way to look at that as well, and that is that, assuming that we're not fighting an enemy, but we are all wanting to live each day healthy, educated, if we choose to be, with the ability to work for a living, and to be free, and to be alive, and to thrive in this world. And as long as as long as any of us are not feeling that kind of freedom, then all of us have an issue. And so, I would talk with the people that you're speaking about, and share with them that, to the point that Alberto made, out of many one, right? And right now there are individuals and groups that are not treated the same way, and that have not had the opportunities that other groups have had. And so we have to do the work, whether we talk about it in jargon or we don't talk about it that way. We have to do the work in order to ensure that our world is more equal, and that people are provided opportunities that they have not been often provided equally.
Right. And also taking it down to organizational level, which is one of the things we're talking about, it is also realizing that in the end, we basically probably, if we're working in the same company or in the same business, we probably share some of the same goals.
Oh, yes.
Because we want the company to succeed. We want the company to have money, to succeed, so we can all keep our jobs, hopefully improve our way of life. So I think that also goes back to motivations. And the basic motivation of why this is so important is goals. Is the goals at company level, the goals at team level, the goals at individual level. And the more we can all go beyond those separate things that apparently separates us and realize we're working together as a team. And if the team doesn't achieve its goals, everybody in the team is going to suffer sooner or later.
That's right.
Everybody in the company is going to suffer sooner or later. But if we're all able to pull together, and I like to say one thing is, yes, we all have to keep our individuality and be able to be who we are, but also realize that we also, as part of a team, also have to follow certain common rules so we can all play as a team and act as a team. And that's the balance that companies have to keep. Where do I put the rules that are going to help us do our business the way we have to do it so we can achieve the goals we have to achieve? But only that. And be above and beyond that, everybody should be very much open to being who they are.
Alberto, there's another question here. Susan Price. San Antonio has so much to teach about tolerance, diversity, coexisting and creating community across cultures. What do you say about that?
Well, I'll just give you a very personal example.
More like a statement.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. Like I said, I'm from Mexico, and from Mexico, and I got here. I mean, I've been in the U.S. all my life. I lived here when I was a little boy. My dad died, and my mom's family lives in California, so we went and lived there many years. Then I went back to Mexico. But to the point is, I came to San Antonio 10 years ago from Mexico. I can tell you I have neither myself nor my wife or my son, we have never had a negative experience anywhere in San Antonio. I'm really lucky probably, but also it tells much about what's happening in the city. We've never had a negative impact, somebody looking at us the wrong way or somebody talking about us, you know, in some terms because we are from Mexico or we're Hispanic. And I have an advantage. I don't look particularly Hispanic. Sometimes people tell me you don't look like it. Okay? My wife does, as well as my son. But we've never had an issue with that because it's 60% Hispanic. Okay, so it is already a majority minority city. But everybody is here. I feel we can go beyond that. We're working together to move beyond that. There was a moment here when we had a Hispanic mayor, Hispanic majority city council. And, you know, we have a lot of Hispanics. So that's a conversation that's kind of being left behind, and now we're looking forward to how do we pull all the strengths together to move forward. You know.
So Alberto, here's another question as well by McDonald, Dana McDonald. I'm hoping I said that correctly. It says, people don't realize what huge cultural differences there are within the Latin community.
Oh yeah. And I like to refer to Oscar Wilde, who said, talking about the U.S. and England, but they're referring as a paraphrasing. He used to say, you know, the United States and England are two countries divided by the same language. Okay. Well, you can say the same. I mean, I've been speaking with people from Spain, for example, certain regions of Spain, and I've been talking with them for 5-10 minutes, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. Mm-hmm. They were speaking Spanish from Spain, and I was speaking Spanish from Mexico. Mm-hmm. And the same can be said from Spanish from other countries, or we have such different concepts of food, of behavior, things like that. That
accents and dialects,
yeah, and culture also. You know, it's very, very diverse. It's like saying that Chinese and Japanese and Hindus are the same. Mm-hmm. Whoa, you know, it doesn't happen.
That's the you know, it is interesting. I do a lot of work with Latino people, obviously, in organizations, and people are very, you know, they're like, I'm Cuban, I'm Argentinian, I'm Mexican, I'm from Spain, and they're very, very proud of who they are, even though we consider them all our Latinx brothers and sisters, which is why I say Latinx. That's, you know, sort of a broad term. But we have the same thing in the African American community as well. There's you know, that's a whole nother talk. But there are different cultural aspects of all of us, which is the beauty, you know, to the point that you made earlier, Alberto, which is the beauty of really appreciating each individual as an individual, really appreciating what every single individual brings to the table. But those elements, those diversity elements of them, to allow them to actually express those and to teach people.
I think something happened in there. Okay, but let me say, well, we get Rachel back in here.
Go ahead, Alberto. Yes.
Yeah. Let me just say also that, and again, we have to open up that conversation, because when we work with the diversity in organizations, and we work on creating one single common language of collaboration, one single common language that becomes effective and efficient. Organizations need to realize that the things that are going to make teams effective and efficient and productive are also the things that tend to neutralize biases and make people more inclusive. One thing that is not negated by the other. As a matter of fact, the more you focus on a data-driven mindset, on an outcome-driven leadership, the more you focus on those things, the more you're going to have inclusiveness, because those things tend to neutralize biases. They tend to be those curtains that I was talking about. But I want to just one last thing about diversity. I've been in meetings where I realized that even though everybody might be Mexican or whatever, there's diversity and people understand each other because one is an engineer, the other one is a lawyer, and the other one is a salesperson, and they just don't understand each other. Or where I see somebody that is coming from New York and somebody is from Texas, and they just don't understand each other. So diversity also goes well beyond those things of gender and race. I mean, you have professional diversity, and if you work in a corporation, you know how hard it is for legal to understand production, to understand sales. They just don't see eye to eye, and that's diversity at work. That's another. So the key here is to understand that we all have goals in common, to create the proper motivations and the proper, mindsets and the inner desire to integrate, and then also provide the outside elements to create one single language of collaboration where we can all come together to achieve the goals that are going to make all our lives better in the company, and it's going to make the company thrive and everybody thrive with it.
Well said, Alberto.
Well,
said.
That's one of the key factors in diversity, correct? Is having different, you can have even the same culture brings in a different way of thinking. So, within the Mexican culture, there's diversity within there,
Yeah. Well, here in the U.S., like we said, you can come from Texas or Alabama or Boston or New York, and that's a totally different culture right there.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Interestingly enough, we're talking about sort of regional differences between individuals that kind of shows up at work as well, right? And so there, we've got obviously our visual diversity, things that we can see, our gender, our ethnicity, et cetera. But there are some regional differences between individuals, especially in the workplace, that can show up in the way that people execute their work, in the way that they communicate with one another, the level of respect or tone that people have. So you're absolutely right. When we work with individuals and organizations, we really try to make sure that we are giving them all of those holistic tools to understand each other. You talked about the conversations, the interesting conversations between legal and HR and sales, and these people can all be sort of homogenous externally, but have completely different points of view from one another. And interestingly, again, even if you think about diversity prediction theorem, if you're trying to come up with a solution, you want all of those different ideas and expertise in the room in order to come up with that great solution.
Exactly, and to that point, what we do, for example, in Sync, and the way we approach this systemically, and I in no way do I want to become prescriptive. It's not a prescription. It's not, right. but it is a more formal understanding of human systems. The moment that we realize we're dealing with another system within the organization, I want to take a little bit of I want to demystify this a little bit, because sometimes we tend to think of culture and all these things and say, oh, these are so intangible. And let me just give my 2 cents worth in that sense. One of the things that we're trying to create an awareness of is that your human system, and we call it the human system, is one more of your systems. It is a system. It's an operational system. It's running at 100 miles per hour right now as you speak in your business, in your organization. It can be public, private, for-profit, non-profit. As long as you have people in there, you have a human system and it's running at full speed. And if you don't understand how it operates and you don't apply those truths that work so well in all your other systems to that system, you're going to continue having the issues. And that system runs at 3 levels. It's relational, all that things that make us human, cultures, personalities, gender, race, all those things. But it's also structural. It's how all those things that are happening, how do we collaborate with each other? And here, let me tell you one thing. All those are processes. Having meetings, making phone calls, sending emails, sharing in a project, all those are processes. And any process that is not formally managed is going to become an organic ritual. So in most organizations, meetings are rituals that project a culture, that share a culture, that even help or hinder integration and diversity and include and being inclusive. Even things like meetings or even things like communicating. Those things help us program one thing or the other. And if they are not formally operated, number one, it's a huge waste of resources because you get 200 emails per day, you go Zoom after Zoom. But not only that, the way they are done can harm the culture. But if you formally manage them, that operational level, then it becomes a thing of beauty. And then you have the structural, which is everything we were talking about. How you create the rules and policies and procedures that are going to make people operate one way or the other, and how you set those objectives so you make sure everybody has common objectives that are very clear and that everybody's involved and engaged in those objectives, in those outcomes. So it's a system. I mean, everything you do with all the other systems, safety, quality, production, do in your collaboration system. Establish a common language of collaboration that lets people be who they are, but creates a common language where we can all collaborate seamlessly, across functional divides, across structural divides, gender, all that.
And everything else. And
Yes.
Beautifully said, Alberto. The only thing that I would add is that we continue to collect data around it, right? That we don't assume that the system will always work just because it worked yesterday or last year, that we continue to test it and to question it, that we continue to ensure that system is working the way that it was designed to, and that it continues to work for good for everyone in the system. Beautifully said.
Absolutely, you are totally right, and especially with the speed at which our environment is changing. What was right 1 year ago is no longer right now.
Absolutely. I mean, and we haven't even, one of the, again, we need a whole retreat. An hour is not enough time, but we haven't even spoken to the fact that again, we're living through and experiencing 3 pandemics as we speak right now, and the impact of those elements. Obviously, COVID is one of them, the racial pandemic, the economic pandemic, and the impacts of those on our systems, changes the way that we engage one another, the things that we learn from one another, the opportunities that we are presented with as well. And so all of these elements are really important to continue to manage, to continue to collect data about, and to continue to revise as needed so that system continues to be healthy for everyone and continues to thrive.
Absolutely. You're totally right. It's organic, it grows, it changes, and you have to continue doing exactly that. Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to thank our speakers today, Dr. Rachel and Alberto. Many thanks to our speakers today for joining. And do you have any latest projects you guys want to mention?
Wow. I first of all, let me just say, Jacqueline, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, TEDx San Antonio. Thank you, Red Dot Café. I really appreciate it. We are working with organizations around the world, literally helping them with exactly what we're talking about, helping them to create diversity plans, to create inclusive cultures, and to continue to collect data about where the lived experience of their customers and their employees. So we're excited. We wake up every day excited to do our God jobs, and I really want to thank Alberto as well. You are such a godsend and such a wonderful individual. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
And Rachel, I mean, likewise, it's been a huge pleasure, and I'm sure it's just we're going to continue this conversation going for a long time, And Jacqueline, thank you for everything. Thanks to TEDx San Antonio, which I'm part of, and I love. It's part of my life, and Red Dot Café, and well, the only thing I can tell you is the one thing that we have going right now, which is really exciting. We just finished. It took us almost 3 years, but we designed and created the first collaboration system certification in the world. So we're now able to certify human collaboration systems to certify that they are effective, efficient, equitable in day-to-day collaboration and activity. And we believe it's going to be a tool that is going to help. We're really excited. We already did one certification. It was beautiful. And we believe it's going to be a huge tool to continue. I love what Rachel calls the God mission. I'm going to take that from her. I used to go to my life mission, but I like the God mission better. And, so I think it's going to help something that's going to help our mission, both myself and InSync, to move forward with that. And it's really exciting.
All right. Well, thank you. And you can watch our previous episodes of Red Dot Cafe on our website at tedxsanantonio.com/Red Dot Cafe. Future episodes are in the works. Stay tuned for the follow us online as well, TEDx San Antonio, for updates. Thanks for watching. Until the next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.